faithfully, delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally here with the Book Talk. Today, the book we're interpreting for you is called The Scarlet Letter. The author is Nathaniel Hawthorne. He was one of America's earliest short story writers and a pioneer of psychological fiction. Hawthorne lived during a time when Puritanism was strong in America. He was born in Salem, a hub for Puritans. Generations of Hawthorne's ancestors were fervent Puritans, so he got a religious education from childhood. In Hawthorne's hometown, there was a famous miscarriage of justice called the Salem Witch Trials. It started when many young girls suddenly got a weird illness with convulsions and screams. Ministers blamed witches and used torture to force confessions, causing 19 hangings and one death by crushing with stones. Those accused of being witches were women who didn't fit Puritan norms. Actually, from modern medicine, those girls just had a bacterial infection, not witchcraft. But 20 lives were lost, tragically. It's said one of Hawthorne's ancestors, 5 generations back, was a key judge in that injustice. This guilt stayed with Hawthorne. In college, he added a W to his last name to distance himself from those ancestors, which made him think deeply about religious persecution. Hawthorne's family was once wealthy and prominent, but it declined during his childhood. When Hawthorne was 4, his father died. At 9, he became lame from an accident. These hardships made him solitary from a young age. This loneliness filled his works and drew him to focus on marginalized people. After her husband's death, Hawthorne's mother was always gloomy, reclusive, and rarely saw even family. As a kid, Hawthorne saw his mother's sorrow. His childhood made him sensitive and compassionate, especially for women on society's edges. The Scarlet Letter, the heroine of this novel, Hester, is exactly that kind of woman. The story begins on a summer morning. Locals wait outside the prison gates, gossiping maliciously about a woman named Hester. The prison door finally opened, and a young woman holding a 3-month-old baby came into view. Despite enduring immense humiliation, she remained graceful in posture and calm in gaze. On her chest, her clothes were embroidered with a red letter A, the first letter of adultery in English. She gave birth to a baby girl with a man who wasn't her husband, committing adultery. According to local law, Hester was to be sentenced to death. But because she was originally from England, young and beautiful, the church thought she might have been greatly tempted into sin. So they only sentenced Hester to stand on the scaffold for 3 hours and wear a red letter A forever as punishment. But the public humiliation was worse than death. The walk from the prison door to the scaffold wasn't far, but to Hester it felt endless. With each step, she felt sharp pain, as if her heart was thrown on the street for others to trample. Under the crowd's gaze, the A on Hester's chest shone brightly. The Ionic, beautiful. The A was made by herself with fine red cloth, embroidered with golden thread around the edges, exquisitely crafted. Paired with Hester's gown, it looked surprisingly elegant. The local women gathered to shame her, but upon seeing the delicate A, they couldn't help but praise her fine needlework. She turned the lifelong punishment imposed by the church into the most beautiful adornment on herself. From the start of the novel, the author created a metaphor about a rebel. The crowd pressured Hester with threats and bribes, trying every way to get her to reveal her accomplice, but she refused. Helplessly, the church sent the respected young minister Dimmesdale to persuade her, but Hester looked straight into Dimmesdale's deep, melancholy eyes and said, "The Scarlet Letter is branded too deeply. You cannot remove it. I hope I can endure my own pain and also endure his pain." Hester's meaningful reply is the novel's biggest foreshadowing. Here, Hawthorne demonstrates his signature interwoven psychological depiction blending reality, imagination, and memories to give readers a fuller understanding of the character's true mental states and feelings. As Hester, wearing the Scarlet Letter and holding her baby, climbed the scaffold to accept public punishment, she felt all her memories and past come alive. She sometimes felt that the scene vanished before her eyes, or at least turned hazy and unclear, like a heap of fragmented, bizarre images. Her thoughts, especially her memories, were unusually active at this moment, constantly conjuring up various other scenes. Hester saw her childhood home, saw her mother, and saw a possibility for a fresh start. However, in the end, Hester saw her humiliated self on the scaffold. She was a sinner who had committed a grave mistake, destined to be insulted for life. Just as Hester stood high up, publicly humiliated, she spotted a familiar figure in the crowd. He was pale and thin with a slight deformity. His left shoulder was a bit higher than his right. At the time, she thought it was a hallucination, but only after being taken back to the prison and seeing this person again did Hester become sure she had really seen him. The person she least wanted to see at this moment was her husband, Chillingworth. It turned out that 2 years ago, they lived together in Holland. Later, Chillingworth decided to cross the ocean and settle in the New England region. And he sent his wife over first, stayed behind to handle some affairs, but then there was no word from him for 2 years. 2 years later, he suddenly appeared before his wife, only to find her holding another man's child in her arms. But he didn't want to publicly admit he was cuckolded, so he decided to live incognito as a doctor. Here, he also forbade Hester from telling outsiders about their relationship, trying to uncover clues, find Hester's lover, and take revenge in his own way. After Hester had served her punishment, she lived a reclusive life alone with her daughter, Pearl. Actually, she could have left here, gone to a new environment, and started a new life, but she chose to stay. The reason she stayed was because of the man she deeply loved, who was the father of the child. Her accomplice lived here. Hester chose a lonely little cottage on the outskirts of town, at the edge of a peninsula, away from any residential area, as her home. Although life was lonely, it wasn't so bad that she and her child lacked food or clothing, because she was skilled at needlework. Interestingly, the A that Hester had to wear constantly, because of its unique design and exquisite craftsmanship, it gradually became an advertisement for her superb skills. Embroideries made by her sinful hands slowly appeared on the governor's necktie, on military sashes, pastors' ties, and babies' hats. But there's one outfit locals would never ask Hester to make: the white veil symbolizing a bride's noble chastity. It seems they're collectively expressing their disdain for Hester in this way. Puritan society values frugality and asceticism, as if all joy is immoral behavior. To fit in and atone for her sins, Hester lived like an ascetic herself, seeking nothing beyond survival. But she tried hard to give her child freedom. Here, Puritan clothing is mostly black, but what she dressed Pearl in was always inventive and bold with colors. Pearl was Hester's only reason to live. They relied on each other in the gloomy Puritan world, being both the most ostracized outcasts and the only bright spot. One day, Hester went to the governor's mansion to deliver newly made gloves. Little Pearl accompanied her mother, wearing a bright red dress, running around her. The author describes her as a flame all over, like a fruit of intense emotion, arriving unexpectedly at any moment. As the product of an adultery sin, little Pearl showed no trace of sinfulness. Instead, she was lively, cute, and full of life. A little flame that caught the governor and guests' attention. Besides the governor, the guests included the old church pastor, the young minister Dimmesdale, who advised Hester, and Chillingworth, who had settled in town for 2 or 3 years, Hester's husband. Because he poured his heart into church affairs and overworked, his health was severely damaged. Chillingworth used his doctor identity to approach Dimmesdale under the pretext of caring for his illness, step by step becoming his closest friend. The old pastor believed Hester was a fallen sinner, incapable of giving the child proper education to become God's loyal servant. So he wanted to take Pearl away and give her to someone else to raise. And in desperation, Hester suddenly turned to Dimmesdale and asked him to speak fairly. Before this, she hadn't even looked directly at this pale, haggard young man. To everyone's surprise, Dimmesdale actually spoke up for Hester. He said, God gave Hester this child to save her mother's soul. The mother should raise her to be upright, and the child's presence will constantly remind Hester of her past sin for self-reflection and repentance. Dimmesdale's words convinced the governor, but he didn't expect this argument would arouse Chillingworth's suspicion. He began to suspect this young minister was the one who had an affair with his wife. To find solid evidence, Chillingworth began prying into his privacy, luring him to reveal the secret that had made him sick with guilt. Finally, one day, while Dimmesdale was sound asleep, he quietly approached and unbuttoned his clothes. Under the inner garment he never removed, a capital A was discovered on his chest, so Dimmesdale was Hester's accomplice in adultery. Now, certain of his suspicion, Chillingworth seized the chance to move into Dimmesdale's residence. On the surface, it was for better treatment, but actually to torment him psychologically and weaken him. Spying on Dimmesdale, Chillingworth discovered he was devout but tormented by secret guilt. Chillingworth determined Dimmesdale's declining health stemmed from this mental anguish. So he exploited this, constantly discussing body-soul relations and the guilt of hidden secrets. Bit by bit, he increased the minister's psychological burden, further destroying his health. For example, once Chillingworth deliberately steered their conversation back to guilt. While secretly observing Dimmesdale, he asked why guilty people refuse to confess, even knowing they'd feel relief. At this topic, Dimmesdale would clutch his chest as if struck by sharp heart pain. In a ministerial tone, Dimmesdale explained that sinners still care for God's glory and human happiness, so they hesitate to expose their shame. Faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally here with the Book Talk. Today, the book we're interpreting for you is called The Scarlet Letter. The author is Nathaniel Hawthorne. He was one of America's earliest short story writers and a pioneer of psychological fiction. And Hawthorne lived during a time when Puritanism was strong in America. He was born in Salem, a hub for Puritans. Generations of Hawthorne's ancestors were fervent Puritans, so he got a religious education from childhood. In Hawthorne's hometown, there was a famous miscarriage of justice called the Salem witch trials. It started when many young girls suddenly got a weird illness with convulsions and screams. Ministers blamed witches and used torture to force confessions, causing 19 hangings and 1 death by crushing with stones. Those accused of being witches were women who didn't fit Puritan norms. Actually, for modern medicine, those girls just had a bacterial infection, not witchcraft. But 20 lives were lost tragically. It's said one of Hawthorne's ancestors, 5 generations back, was a key judge in that injustice. This guilt stayed with Hawthorne. In college, he added a W to his last name to distance himself from those ancestors, which made him think deeply about religious persecution. Hawthorne's family was once wealthy and prominent, but it declined during his childhood. When Hawthorne was 4, his father died. At 9, he became lame from an accident. These hardships made him solitary from a young age. This loneliness filled his works and drew him to focus on marginalized people. After her husband's death, Hawthorne's mother was always gloomy, reclusive, and rarely saw even family. As a kid, Hawthorne saw his mother's sorrow. His childhood made him sensitive and compassionate, especially for women on society's edges. The Scarlet Letter. The heroine of this novel, Hester, is exactly that kind of woman. The story begins on a summer morning. Locals wait outside the prison gates, gossiping maliciously about a woman named Hester. Without caring that his cheek was pressed against the scarlet letter, this embrace held so much meaning. For these 7 years, Hester had suppressed the deep affection in her heart, including her rebellion against fate's injustice and her resolute spirit to love and hate bravely. Of course, it was also Hester's release after bearing all the humiliation and pain alone for 7 years. For 7 years, all the unspeakable suffering ended in her lover's embrace, while the whole world frowned upon him. Through the long 7 years, the whole world frowned upon this lonely, sorrowful man, but he endured it all, never once turning away. With his firm yet sorrowful gaze, even heaven frowned upon him, but he persevered and didn't die. However, the frown of this pale, weak, guilty, and sorrowful man was what Hester couldn't bear. It would make her unable to live. Facing her own suffering, Hester was strong enough to endure anything. But seeing her lover's suffering, Hester couldn't compromise. She had to rise up and fight. After confessing her deep love, Hester took off the scarlet letter and threw it into the stream, showing her determination. After discarding that mark of shame, Hester took a deep sigh of relief. Her spirit freed from the heavy weight of shame and gloom. A blush appeared on her pale face, her feminine beauty, youth, and graceful charm all returned. But Dimmesdale, bound by religion, believed running away would add sin to sin, and he hesitated. But in the end, he agreed to Hester's request, deciding to leave with Hester and Pearl by boat after delivering the celebratory sermon at the religious festival. Dimmesdale's sermon at the festival was very successful, but afterward, he suddenly became very weak, pale, and staggering. His inner guilt and conscience ultimately overcame his will to escape. Passing by the scaffold where Hester was once humiliated, supported by Hester, he publicly revealed the secret he had buried for 7 years. He is Pearl's father. Back then, standing here, he concealed his own guilt while hypocritically urging Hester to reveal her accomplice. Now he finally dared to take responsibility for his sins. Then this exhausted minister collapsed on the platform and died. Chillingworth made revenge his sole purpose. After the minister's death, he also lost his purpose in life. All his physical strength, energy, intellect, and vitality seemed to wither overnight. A year after the minister's passing, he too died in sorrow. Chillingworth left a substantial inheritance to Pearl, whom he once hated. With this funding, the lovely Pearl went to Europe with her mother, met a nobleman, married, and lived well. Later, Hester returned to Boston, still wearing the scarlet letter while doing good deeds. When Hester died, she was buried beside the minister's grave, sharing a tombstone inscribed. On a field black, the letter A read, "This tragedy about sin and redemption ends here." While the plot isn't complex, the author packed it with symbolism, a key artistic feature of the Scarlet Letter. The red letter A is the book's most crucial symbol, appearing throughout the story. Initially, authorities forced Hester to wear the A as punishment for adultery, to shame her. But her lover, the minister, was named Arthur, written as Arthur in English. Here, the author plays a word game using A to secretly represent the minister. So while everyone thought Hester was being punished, she proudly wore her lover's initial, a rebellion against cold Puritan morality. When the lovers are finally buried side by side, the scarlet A on their shared tombstone also represents amour, love. And moreover, besides the A, another symbol worth noting is the scaffold. The scaffold appears three times. First, at the novel's start, where Hester stood with the A for 3 hours of public shaming. Here, the scaffold represents Puritan discipline and unbreakable laws. The second time, the minister, exhausted by Chillingworth's psychological torture, countless times wanted to confess being Pearl's father during sermons but failed from fear. Gradually, he developed sleepwalking. Once, he went alone to the scaffold at midnight. He stood on the scaffold, shouting the truth loudly. Here, the scaffold became a place of atonement. Like in a church confessional, he reflected on his past and examined his soul here. The third time is the climax of the story. The minister recognized Hester and her daughter and decided to deliver one last sermon at the festival before eloping with them. Right at the last sermon, the minister experienced the most glorious moment of his life. His sermon was deeply moving, and his audience praised him unanimously. In everyone's eyes, he was the embodiment of holiness. But just as the festival procession passed the scaffold, he seemed guided by fate. He invited Hester and Pearl to stand on the scaffold with him. Here, he finally spoke the words he had kept inside for years. I am Hester's accomplice. I am Pearl's father. I should have stood here 7 years ago to face judgment. After speaking the truth, he tore open the pouch on his chest, revealing the scarlet letter branded there, and then stopped breathing. No one could explain how the red brand came to be. The silent crowd seemed to witness a miracle. The minister's last sermon in life was actually delivered on the scaffold. He atoned with his life, letting everyone feel the solemnity and greatness of true love. Finally, the scaffold became a pulpit, the birthplace for spreading new ideas and morals. Having discussed the novel's unique techniques, let's now talk about its themes. The Scarlet Letter is set in 17th century North America under Puritan colonial rule. Puritan values are a crucial key to understanding this novel. Their Puritanism is a branch of Protestant Christianity, originating in 16th century England. Later, most Puritans fled to America. Therefore, when people speak of Puritanism, they generally refer to American Puritanism. American Puritanism isn't a strict denomination, but rather an attitude and set of values. And Puritans believe that every individual could communicate directly with God, viewing the Bible as the sole authority. Puritans believed that humans are stewards of God's wealth, so they must work diligently, practice abstinence and frugality. Puritan ethics restrict all pleasurable activities, demanding minimal consumption and directing all expenses toward increasing wealth. Later, Puritanism gradually developed to an extreme, overemphasizing human rationality while rejecting emotions, forbidding desires, and suppressing natural human instincts. During the era of the Scarlet Letter, Puritans could only wear simple black clothing, with specific laws even prohibiting commoners from extravagance. Puritan household rules were extremely strict. Women could be jailed for smiling in public, and children playing would be beaten with rulers. Hawthorne opposed this Puritan tyranny, consistently emphasizing the concept of the natural human in the Scarlet Letter. He believed human natural existence precedes moral existence, and that innate instincts and desires should be recognized. That's why he created a brave and resilient woman. Hester embodied feminine beauty, showing longing and loyalty in love, passion for life, and rebellion against religious constraints. However, no writer creates in a vacuum. Puritanism subtly influenced Hawthorne, especially regarding original sin. Original sin is a Christian concept. Adam and Eve, tempted by the serpent, violated God's command by eating Eden's apple. As humanity's ancestors, this sin passed to all descendants, establishing the idea of inherent human sinfulness. To Puritans, since humans are born sinful with inherently evil natures, life becomes an atonement process. Everyone should worship God, abstain from desires, live frugally, and work diligently. Only through this could salvation be attained. Influenced by these ideas, Hawthorne focused on exploring humanity's darkness and paths to redemption throughout his life. Hawthorne believed in the power of love and ethics. He believed humans could eliminate original sin and save their souls by purifying their inner world, pursuing moral perfection, and treating all with benevolence. Like Hester, her original sin was lust, yet she neither wallowed in self-pity nor despaired. Instead, she acknowledged her fault and accepted due punishment. She was God's obedient servant, yet a rebel against religious dogma. She neither abandoned her weak lover nor fled the sinful land, but transformed personal love into universal compassion. Through kindness and goodness, she changed public perception, turning her sinful self into a saintly embodiment. Rather than passively accepting punishment, actively doing good and self-purification is the true path to redemption for people. For Hester, falling into sin was original sin, rebellion, and the beginning of her path to self-redemption. And Dimmesdale's sin is more complex. As a respected minister, he constantly wavered between religious doctrine and worldly happiness. Common love and desires became his original sin, plunging him into an abyss of pain he couldn't escape. On one hand, he sincerely repented and longed for redemption, but due to cowardice in his character, he couldn't publicly reveal his identity as an adulterer, suffering deeper condemnation from his conscience. Violating doctrine is a sin, but concealing the sin is an even greater sin. But Hawthorne's profundity lies in how he, through delicate descriptions and strong sympathy, makes readers feel that Dimmesdale's failure to resist ingrained notions and his abandonment of love and life's passion are also sins. This sin betrayed his lover, betrayed himself, and betrayed the rights and dignity of being human. The theme of the Scarlet Letter is Hawthorne's contradiction. On one hand, he vehemently opposes Puritanism's stifling of humanity, affirming secular happiness, praising human nature, and valuing true love. But at the same time, he inevitably agrees with Puritan views on original sin and redemption. This contradiction is also reflected in the inner struggles and quests of the novel's characters. Just like the characters in the novel, everyone has faced confusion in choices to some extent. How to find balance between being true to oneself and meeting social expectations is a lifelong topic we need to explore. Now, all right, that concludes our introduction to Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. Keynotes are below the audio. See you next time.